Hello, I am Grin Grimsley, and welcome to the very first episode of my video game review show. This should be quite interesting, as I've never actually played video games before. This was, you see, supposed to be Grim's show until management gave him Sci-Fi Minecart instead, so I may be a little bit out of my depth here. I do, however, aim to approach it with optimism and an open mind. The machine I will be using to review these games is what management and Grim have assured me is the latest and greatest in video game technology, the Atari 2600.
Looking at the Atari 2600, I find myself feeling as if it's come straight from the future. Its sleek black plastic design and wood grain finish make it appear as if it was ripped straight out of the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Along the top of the gaming machine we have 6 switches: power, which gives you the option of on and off; TV type, which gives you color and black but no option for plasma; 2 difficulty switches, which give you the options of A and B; a game select switch; and a reset switch. I'm not a metallurgist, but I believe the switches may be made of chrome, which is quite stylish and goes well with the wood grain finish. Plugged into the back of the gaming machine we have 2 controllers, both consisting of 1 pleasure stick and a red button. Along with the video game machine, management has also sent me my first game and manual. So without any further ado, what better way to start my video game review show than with what I'm told is the Atari 2600's release title, Halo 2600. Once you plug the cartridge into the gaming machine as if you were loading a rifle and hit the on switch, you are greeted by what is kind of like a DVD menu select screen. Quite a catchy tune plays, which I suppose is the game's theme song, and you have the words Halo 2600 on the screen, as well as a spinning ring in the background, which I suppose is the same one that appears on the cartridge and on the front of the manual. It's at this point that I realize that the title Halo, as well as the imagery of the Halo on the cartridge, the manual, and now the title screen may be a little bit more than a catchy title, so I consult the manual to find out more. My suspicions are confirmed as the manual tells me that the Halo is actually a giant weapon capable of destroying all life in the galaxy, and is actually the setting of this game. You've crash-landed on this Halo, and you now must defend it from a group of aliens known as the Covenant, who intend to use it to destroy all life in this galaxy. Which is an interesting decision, as the Covenant are probably also considered life in this galaxy. You play as the Master Chief in this game, apparently, who is a genetically enhanced super soldier and humanity's best hope. In the manual, all the pictures of him have him wearing a helmet, and aside from Master Chief, we don't hear his real name, so I'm going to assume his face looks like mine, and his name is Grin Grimsley. Lastly, the manual asks me, can I battle my way through the massive world that is Halo, defeat the Covenant, and save humanity? Let's find out, manual. Let's find out.
Well, hot dang.
The experience of playing this game is just incredible. Where you point your pleasure stick is where your little character on the screen goes. The level of immersion in this is just mind-boggling. It's as if I'm playing a movie. Grim can keep Sci-Fi Minecart, I have Sci-Fi real life. Eventually you can find a gun and actually pick it up. From this point on, clicking the red button will fire a shot. But perhaps I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's talk about the graphics and gameplay. You start off in a blue field with green trees around. It might seem a bit strange at first that the field is blue, but you have to remember that this is an artificial ring world, so the grass can really be whatever color whoever made the ring world wants it to be. Your walk cycle is a bit strange. It looks as if you're MC Hammer sliding everywhere. And the aliens' walk cycles, while a little bit better, still seems a bit unnatural. But aside from that, the graphics are gorgeous. Without using much imagination, you can tell that your little green character is the badass you see on the manual. It's just unfortunate that they also didn't include high-quality pictures of the Covenant in the manual, so you could also imagine what they look like. Speaking of the Covenant, the manual informs you that you can come across grunts, elites, brutes, and tart guns. In my experience, grunts are really the hardest to defeat because they are a smaller target, and turret guns don't seem to be defeatable. They just take as many bullets as you hit and continue firing back, so I just try to avoid them and run past them as quickly as I can. Aside from the turret guns and the final boss, all enemies can be defeated with one shot. You can also be killed with one shot unless you've picked up the shield, which is one of the 4 power-ups you can get in the game, which consist of the M60 pistol, the sniper rifle, the aforementioned shield, and the speed boots, which become real handy later as each screen you progress through makes the enemies fire faster and move faster, so you really need those boots to be able to keep on top of them. A negative of the game is some of the cheap deaths you encounter. If you touch the walls, even in the bluegrass area, you die. The manual warns you to beware of alien technology as it can be fatal to touch, and I suppose, being artificial, the entire ring world is technically alien technology, but this means that even touching the bluegrass should kill you, and if touching the bluegrass doesn't kill you, and touching the trees doesn't kill you, then surely you can touch the walls. However, this is not too much of a negative, because after you've touched the walls once and found out that you shouldn't touch the walls, you really don't do it a second time. Another negative you encounter with this game is the elites guarding the sniper rifle and the speed boots, because they come in groups of 3. This would be fine, and it's quite intimidating when you first see it, but when you kill one of the 3, the other 2 of the 3 die as well. It's just stupid and kind of reminds me of when you used to make those little paper people chains when you folded up paper, cut out a figurine, and then unfolded the paper and they were all joining hands. Well, that's what this intimidating force reminds me of. Scary stuff. The other negative in the game is, once again, something that appears intimidating at first, but then you find out very quickly isn't. This is when you encounter the large versions of the bad guys. They are exactly the same as the small versions, they're just bigger. And at first when you see them you go, oh no, giant grunt. But then you realize it's just a regular grunt with the same firepower as the smaller grunt and just more area to hit them. These, however, are very small negatives in an otherwise fantastic game. The actual difficulty curve is very fair, and as you get further and further in, as I mentioned earlier, the enemies move and fire faster. There seem to be more of them. The screens fill with more bullets, and by the time you reach the enemy boss, who is quite hard to defeat and takes, I think, 3 shots to defeat, your heart is already pounding. Once, or perhaps if you beat the game, you have the option of replaying it in the legendary mode. You can tell you've reached this because the background of the halo ring in the start menu turns red. The manual describes legendary mode as having an increased difficulty level, but as far as I can tell it just makes your character move painfully slowly, so I really couldn't be bothered playing it. Regardless of that, the game is quite fantastic. The only real improvement I could think of making to it is maybe a score system, so you get points every time you kill an enemy, or possibly even a countdown timer, so you get points depending on how quickly you finish the game. But it's not really required, the game's still great without it. So there you have it. While I do understand that as this is the first and only game I've ever played, my review probably doesn't have much sway, I did enjoy it. So on that experience alone, I do suggest you go down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Halo on the 2600.
Hello and welcome to another episode of my contractually obligated review show. Management has sent us another game, so it looks like today we will be reviewing Space Invaders.
So here it is, Space Invaders for the Atari 2600. The controls in this game are rather simple. Pressing left on your pleasure stick will take your little ship down the bottom there left, and pressing right on your pleasure stick will take your ship right. Clicking the red button will fire a shot upwards. It's one-hit kills if you hit an enemy, and it's one-hit kills if an enemy hits you. You have 3 lives, and if the enemy reaches the bottom, it doesn't matter how many lives you have, it's game over. As soon as I started playing this game, I noticed something quite interesting. This game is basically that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game. Don't believe me? Well, compare this to this. Now, this is not a criticism. I quite enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy. In fact, I would go as far as saying it was the best movie in 2014. The only thing I don't understand is why they did not go ahead and get licensing and call the game That Scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game. If they had done this, I'm sure that we would have ended up with not only better art than what we got on the cartridge, but I'm sure it would have also sold more copies. I mean, Space Invaders? Never heard of it. But That Scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game? Now that is a game title that everyone would remember. Now I know what all of you are thinking. Is this game fantastic? Well, yes, the answer is this game is fantastic. But is it flawless? No. There are a few very minor problems I have with this game, but as a game reviewer I would be remiss in not mentioning them. The first of which is the life counter. You see it whenever you die or whenever you pass a level, and it says how many lives you have left. It starts on 3 and ends on 0. This is what caused me a little bit of confusion. When it said I had 0 lives left, I thought this meant that I had no lives left in the holding, and the life I was on was my last, only to be greeted by the game over screen. Each time the 0 came up, I found myself thinking, oh, this is the last life, I better make this count. There's no more left. But unfortunately, it was telling me I had already used my last life, and the game was already over. This is a minor problem, but I did find myself getting tripped up by it at least 22 times. Another problem with the game is simple variety. The first 3 levels are very exciting. The enemies start up far above in the first one, the next time they're closer, and the third time they are just above you and the barriers are gone. However, level 4 onwards is just them being above you with the barriers gone. They move a little faster and shoot a little faster, but aside from that they don't do anything different. It would have been interesting to see them come down in maybe different columns, or even come down in different ways, or maybe the Space Invaders even being mixed up a little. I don't know, anything to mix it up. Bigger barricades? Who knows, I'm not a game designer, I just know that I thought, oh, it's the level I just passed, again, for each level I passed after level 4. In the game's defense, there is actually quite a bit of variety when it comes to the game select choices. For one-player modes, there are ones in which the platforms are moving, and ones in which the enemies are invisible, which is just terrifying. And, for those of you who have friends, there are quite a few variety in the two-player modes, even one in which both players are on the screen at once. For extra points, you can take pot shots at the little spaceship that moves across the top there. I do feel a little bit bad about this because it doesn't seem to be one of the invaders, but just an innocent passerby. However, because of the promise of extra points, I will happily shoot it down. I mean, heck, for extra points I would strangle a nun. I do highly recommend that you play this game. I know it's only the second game I've ever played, but damn is it a fun one. So, head on down to your local video store and pick up That Scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game. When you hear the sentence, greatest villain in sci-fi history, who do you imagine? The Empire from Star Wars, perhaps? The Klingons from Star Trek? The Covenant from Halo 2600? Or the Kree from That Scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game? Well, if you've said any of these, you would be dead wrong. If you've watched as much sci-fi as I have, and you haven't, you would know the biggest threat in all sci-fi history are asteroids. Don't believe me? Well, watch this.
You're not actually going into an asteroid field.
Here they come. Big asteroid problem here.
We come out of hyperspace into a meteor shower, some kind of asteroid collision.
I do so relish these times of peril.
And now, thanks to the futuristic technology that is the Atari 2600, we have available to us a method and means of revenge against these space rocks. I give you Asteroids on the Atari 2600. In the game, you have 3 different game variants available to you, including having shields, the jump capability, and the ability to flip your ship from one side to the other, which I found to be completely useless. Once you've chosen your game variant, you can activate your jump, shield, or flip capability by pulling backwards on your pleasure stick, and once again the red button is used to fire. The object of the game is quite straightforward. All asteroids must die. As soon as you finish clearing off all the asteroids on the screen, you are jumped into another part of the asteroid belt and you must continue to kill the asteroids. Occasionally a small blue alien ship appears and takes pot shots at you, and then later on a green one. At first I was wondering why these unsolicited attacks were taking place. I even had the ludicrous thought that maybe he was an asteroid sympathizer. A laughable idea. And then I recognized him. That's right, folks, it's the blue ship we were taking potshots at in that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, and he is back for a vengeance. Luckily, once again, killing him gives us extra points. So I say, welcome back, blue guy. A disappointing aspect of this game is the multiplayer. If you remember my review of that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, you would remember that I had praised the fact that you can play as 2 players on the screen at once. Unfortunately, in Asteroids, this does not become available for you, and instead you must take in turns attacking the asteroid menace. As a major fan of the buddy flick genre, I think it would have been awesome to team up and take on the asteroid threat together. Unfortunately, in this respect, the game is lacking. Maybe it would be a cool thing to implement in the sequel. Hint, hint, Atari. Aside from that, this is a pretty solid game. Sometimes when you make your jumps into hyperspace, you come out in front of an asteroid and quickly find yourself dead. But everybody knows it's not safe to make blind jumps into hyperspace, so this should come as no surprise to anybody. Also, if you hold down your shield too long, you explode, but of course that would happen, everyone knows that. I also found it quite difficult to control my spaceship and found myself just staying still in the middle of the screen as much as I could. But I assume this is a reflection of real life, and spaceships are probably quite hard to control. Another slight negative for the game is the life counter. Once again, it shows you how many lives you have, not how many lives you have left. So when you're on 1, you expect that you have 1 life left, but in fact it is the last life that you are on. And also, when you get 5,000 points, you get an extra life. However, the sound that is you getting the extra life sounds a lot like your microwave telling you your popcorn is ready, and this just makes me hungry. Not unlike that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, there is actually no way to win this game. Instead, you have to just keep going as long as you can with the aim of accumulating the highest score you can possibly get. This is perhaps not surprising to most of you, because any idiot could tell you the chances of successfully navigating an asteroid field is 3,720 to 1. So did I like this game? Hell yes I did. It's got everything. You can kill asteroids, you can pilot a ship, and you can kill asteroids. What's more to want in a game? So as far as my recommendations go, if you're an enemy of asteroids or a fan of good sci-fi and great games, head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Asteroids on the Atari 2600.
Hello and welcome to an exciting new episode of my review show, because today, not only management has sent us a new game to look at, but also its box and manual.
As you can see, the box itself looks like it was run over by a truck, which is not surprising if you know our management. It seems to have some sort of knight wearing a visor not unlike Geordi's from Star Trek or possibly Cyclops from X-Men, riding a bird which is also wearing armor, and of course he's holding his jousting stick, which I believe the term is a lance. And on the back of the box we find out that it's an exciting medieval battle, and they've given us a little bit of a blurb which sounds a little bit like a movie trailer pitch, so let's see if I can read it in the voice. Knights on Birdback. In days of old, when knights were bold, they never saw anything like this. You don your helmet, climb into a suit of armor, and hoist your lance. You're entering the medieval world of joust. Fly your faithful ostrich steed into battle against the fearless evil buzzard riders in deep space. Pterodactyls to the right of you, alien eggs to the left. Hold tight as riders do their best to knock you off your bird. This is a joust to the finish. This summer, an exciting medieval battle in space. Joust. So let's have a look at the game itself. As you can see, the graphics are completely gorgeous, and you can tell that you are mounted on an ostrich in space. You look good, and your opponents look good. Speaking of opponents, in this game you have 4 types. The red one, which the manual tells me is called the Bounders. The grey one, which actually looks white, and the manual tells me are the Hunters. And the blue one, which are called the Shadow Lords. You also have the Pterodactyl and a lava pit, which isn't technically a bad guy, but it will ruin your day if you fall into it. The manual tells me that if I hit the Pterodactyl directly on its beak, I can kill it and earn extra points. I've never actually managed to do this, so I just try to avoid him instead. The controls in this game are quite difficult. You have to hit the red button to flap, and you use the pleasure stick to control yourself. It's a little bit hard to really keep yourself on the level or really control where you're going, but you do get the knack of it eventually. To kill any opponent aside from the lava or the pterodactyl, you simply hit it from above. At first I was going to make the obvious comparison between this and that scene in James Cameron's Avatar, but I realized it reminds me a lot stronger of the Skybacks from Dinotopia. If you've not seen that movie, go and watch it, because it is fantastic. In fact, come to think of it, the leader of the Skybacks from Dinotopia even looks a little bit like the Joust character from the cover of the game. If you hit the opponent from exactly the same height you are, you just bounce off, which is good because it's better than dying. Speaking of dying, there are a few cheap deaths in this game. If you respawn with a bird over top of you, you just explode, which really sucks. I mean, over in Asteroids, if there's something about to hit you when you're gonna spawn, it just doesn't spawn you until it's passed, which is it's a lot fairer than just dying as soon as you've started. Every few rounds you come across an egg round, which is just a bunch of eggs bouncing around the screen that you can collect for extra points. However, if you do not pick up an egg in time, it will turn into another Joust character who's trying to kill you. If you get 20,000 points, you get an extra life, which brings me to something I'd like to commend about this game. If you remember my review on Asteroids and that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, you would know that I complained a lot about the fact that the life counter shows you how many lives you have, not how many lives you have left. Well, this game finally gets it right, and it actually shows how many lives you have left. Another commendable thing about this game is, like that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, you can play 2-player and you're both on the screen at the same time. Even cooler, you can kill each other. It might seem petty, but it's good fun. Aside from that, there's really not much else you can say about this game. It's well designed, the graphics are gorgeous, it works well, and it's great fun. If you've ever fantasized about riding an ostrich into battle in space, then go down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Joust on the Atari 2600. And while you're there, pick up a copy of Dinotopia. It's also pretty damn good. and welcome to an exciting new episode of Grin Reviews. Today's episode, Berserk on the Atari 2600. What we're looking at right now is the cover of Berserk for the Atari 2600, and I know what you're all thinking. Is that Keith from Voltron? Why, yes, I believe it is. A better question is, why is that Keith from Voltron? And honestly, I cannot answer that. This game was sent to us by management without a manual or a box, so aside from the image that we have on the cartridge, we don't have much to go by. But I assume you play as Keith from Voltron, and you fight robots, and honestly, as far as storylines go, I can get behind this one. But I know only a small portion of my viewer base is content to only look at the cover out of the cartridge, so let's get to the gameplay. The first thing you notice for Berserk on the Atari 2600 when you turn on the game is the vibrant color choice. The blue on black stands out perfectly, and all the other characters are also perfectly visible. It is, perhaps, through its simplicity and vibrant color choices, the most beautiful game I've seen on the system so far. In many ways, Berserk plays quite similar to Halo 2600, and in many more ways it does not. So let's explore them now. The first major difference is the simplicity itself. When you look at Halo 2600, your little green character does look like the Master Chief you see on the cover. However, when you look at Berserk, your character in-game looks nothing like the Keith you see on the cover. While I do prefer the walk cycle in Berserk over that of Halo 2600, I don't like how it appears to have a hula hoop appearing in its midsection every step it takes. On top of this, while the Berserk character's design does look cool, it causes a minor glitch where the enemy's shot can pass between the hole between your head and body. This does not seem right to me. And once again on the subject of simplicity, Halo 2600 sees you fighting a horde of different kind of aliens, while Berserk only has you fighting against two different kinds, the robots and the giant, terrifying smiley face. And when it comes to directional shooting, in Halo 2600, the bad guys can shoot in all directions, while you can only shoot left and right. But over in Berserk, the bad guys can only shoot up, down, left, and right, while you can shoot in all directions. However, neither of these choices are really better. I mean, in Halo 2600, you have the advantage of being able to strafing fire, while in Berserk, you have the advantage of having more angles to shoot from. So really you just have to adapt to either choice, and both of them work well in their respective games. It would, however, be completely awesome to see a fight between Keith from Voltron from Berserk versus Master Chief from Halo 2600. I would pay big money for ringside at that fight. Another similarity these two games share is the movement speed of the enemies and their bullets, which increases every room you go to. This is perhaps where the similarities end, with the core gameplays of both games being completely different. In Halo 2600, you have a set goal, and once you complete the goal, you reign victorious. Over in Berserk, however, there is no victory conditions. You simply have the goal of surviving as long as you can, and in all games, eventually the inevitable crushing defeat will catch you and destroy you. In this respect, Berserk is much more like real life than Halo 2600 is. There are many different game variants within Berserk that change the difficulty of the game. My favorite to play is variant number 9, which is the hardest as far as I can tell. Number 9 greets you with a quick difficulty curve, with the enemy's fire and movement speed increasing vastly each screen. It also gives you no extra lives for the points you gain, and the evil malicious smiley face is indestructible. These elements combined result in very quick gameplay, as you cannot really last very long at all. This is great if you're playing with a friend, because it means the controller will be constantly rotating. All in all, playing this game was quite a blast, and I highly suggest you get down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Berserk on the Atari 2600. Hello and welcome to another episode of my review show. Today's episode, Planet Patrol, for the Atari 2600. Firstly, I would like to commend the game for its manual, which is set up as a command briefing for the mission you're about to undertake that is the game. You are told that Planet Spectre is under attack by troublesome invading aliens, and your mission is to destroy the alien generators and rescue downed pilots. The overall look and feel of the manual really does get you pumped to play the game, so bang up job on the manual department, guys. It also tells you that each pilot will be given a mission cartridge with the latest laser films of the planet's surface, so it's really cool how it drags you into the game by making your game cartridge itself part of the game's universe. Speaking of the game, the graphics are completely stunning. You have a day and night that cycles through, you have an awesome background, and you really do feel like you are on an alien planet or in the Australian outback. The game has two different difficulty settings, A and B. B makes your ship smaller, which I prefer to play on, and the aim of the game is to last as long as you can and accumulate as many points as you can. There are several ways to accumulate said points, the first of which being destroying enemy ships, the second of which being rescuing survivors, and the third of which is destroying the enemy's force field generators, which you need to destroy to get past the level. After each level you have the option to refuel, which you should take, because if you run out of fuel, it's game over. Each level, the difficulty increases by the enemies moving faster and the levels being longer. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of variety to the game, and as you pass each level, the enemy ships move faster, which is quite difficult to keep up with, and they give you extra points for each kill. This is really cool because even though the difficulty level increases quickly, your points climb with it. So let's recap. Planet Patrol comes with a great storyline, great graphics, and an interesting variety of gameplay, which is an interesting combination because Planet Patrol is an absolutely terrible game, and I do not suggest anyone ever plays this, ever. The reason this game is so bad is the hit detection, which is so terrible that it renders the game basically unplayable. The week I spent playing this game for the review, only about 3 times did I die from my own actual failure. The rest of the time it was because my shots just passed straight through an enemy ship or a generator. Now I like a difficult game as much as the next guy, but I like that difficulty to come from an actual challenge, and not from the game being at its core fundamentally broken. And Planet Patrol is, at its core, fundamentally broken. This terrible hit detection just makes the game insanely frustrating and saps all joy out of it. Like when you're doing really well, and then your shot passes straight through the enemy shield generator, and you hit the shield and get instant game over despite doing really well up until that point. You just feel like beating the game senseless with some sort of bat. I'm not exaggerating when I say that if you put this game in a room with a prisoner and made them play this game and this game only for an hour, they would probably be willing to tell you anything to get out of it. Now, to be fair and completely honest, I did have some fun playing this game, but that fun was basically akin to betting on a horse race when you know nothing about horses, and that race just happens to be loaded in favor of you winning. And losing at the game is basically akin to betting on a horse race when you know nothing about horses, and the race just happens to be loaded so that you'll lose no matter what. That is to say that winning at this game is just you not getting screwed over, and even though it feels good and as if you're doing something right, you're really not doing anything yourself. And losing at this game is just you getting screwed over, and even though you're not doing anything wrong, it's just the game screwing you over. And once you realize that you really have no input on the game, you wonder why you're even trying to improve your score, and you think, man, I could just be playing Asteroids or that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, or Berserk instead. And that's pretty much when you turn off the game, take out the cartridge, and put something better in. The manual tells you that if you get 999,999 points, the game will be over. However, this appears in the list of things that ends the game by killing you. So I can only imagine that if anyone actually managed to get that many points, the game would once again reward you by screwing you over and ending the game as if you had just died. So there you have it, great storyline, great graphics, interesting gameplay, terrible game. So head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of anything other than Planet Patrol. on the Atari 2600. Oh look, I died because I hit the survivors from the top, not from the front. Well, at least the hit detection works there. Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back is the single greatest film in the Star Wars franchise. This became true in 1980 when Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back was first released, and this remained true even in 2005 when Revenge of the Sith was released. This December, I sincerely hope it ceases to be true, but until then, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back is the single greatest Star Wars film. Now that's just an opinion, but it is my opinion, so I'm more than happy to voice it. But you can imagine how excited I was. Now that you know my opinion, when I was told the game I would be reviewing this very special Star Wars Day, May the 4th, would be Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back on the Atari 2600. So let's get to looking at the game itself. As the cover art of the cartridge suggests, it is the Battle of Hoth, which is an interesting choice when you think about it, because it's actually one of the very few large-scale battles in Star Wars that the good guys actually lose. But I guess, in truth, there's not really many other scenes in The Empire Strikes Back you can turn into an Atari game. I suppose you could have done some sort of cat-and-mouse battle game in an asteroid field. Or you could have done some sort of hallway shootout with faceless enemies. Yeah. So I guess if we're not going to reuse already made games, the Battle of Hoth is the perfect choice. Saying that, however, I'm not actually criticizing the Battle of Hoth as a choice for the game. The Battle of Hoth is one of the coolest, if not the coolest, battles in the entire Star Wars franchise, and I am more than happy to play as a member of Rogue Squadron defending the Echo-based shield generators from the Empire while the transports try to escape. So let's talk about the gameplay in this game. You, like Luke Skywalker, fly a snow speeder, and you must shoot down hordes and hordes of AT-ATs before they reach the shield generator. The game is over when they reach the shield generator, and the game is over when you run out of lives. Now when I say shield generator, there's not actually a shield generator, but if the enemies get to the end of your screen, the screen will flash and you will have lost. So I'm assuming that is the shield generator. I'm lacking the manual. The enemy AT-ATs take a lot of hits to kill, unless you manage to hit them in the flashing little square, which turns it into one-hit kills. Depending on how far to the left or right you push your pleasure stick depends on how fast your snowspeeder speeds up, and you can keep track of the enemies down the bottom via a radar, which I just find to be completely awesome. A minor negative in the game is that you cannot actually fire a tow cable, but you can still use your laser by pressing the red button. As always, I started testing the game in the Variation 1 setting, because I figure that is the one that comes up when you start the game, so they should put their best foot forward. I did, however, find it was a little bit slow for the first 1,000 points, because all that happens is the next AT-AT to spawn moves a little bit faster, and for the first 1,000 points this isn't really much of a threat, you just buzz around and get their kills in. However, after a few thousand points, the AT-ATs do start to move a little bit faster, and their shots are fast enough to become an actual threat, and this is where the game really becomes fun. I do, however, wish there was a little bit more variety in the game. Maybe mix things up and put a few probe droids in there, or maybe even put a few ATSTs. And don't go saying there were no ATSTs on Hoth, Grin, because there was at least one. So there. In the game you get an extra life every 2,000 points, and quite refreshingly, you're not one hit, one kills yourself. You can take a few hits, which really inspires you to do a few more ballsy moves than you would probably otherwise be doing. Like most Atari games, there's no actual way to win this game, and instead you just have to last as long as you can. However, this is based on the Battle of Hoth, and in the Battle of Hoth, the snow speeders were sent out to buy time for the evacuation of Echo Base. The only reason the shield generators needed to stay up was to protect the people in Echo Base, so therefore once people weren't in the Echo Base, then the shield generators were no longer needed. So I figured I would time the Battle of Hoth, and at 9 minutes and 16 seconds the Empire destroys the shield generator, so if you do better than that, then you've already done better than the real Rogue Squadron. And at 11 minutes and 50 seconds, Luke in his X-Wing is the last to leave. So therefore, regardless of whether the game is willing to admit it or not, any game that lasts longer than 11 minutes and 50 seconds is a victory, because you have already succeeded in the evacuation of Echo Base. Unfortunately, my best time was 11 minutes and 42 seconds, so some people did not escape Echo Base. This said, Luke got shut down after 6 minutes and 49 seconds, so even though I didn't manage to save everyone, I still did better than a Jedi Master. So there you have it. Good graphics, good but repetitive gameplay, and Star Wars, so where can you go wrong? And this is where I would have been leaving the review until I discovered Variation 16. What's Variation 16, you may ask? Well, it is the hardest variation that I've found on the game so far. The game starts off quickly, so you don't need to get to 1,000 points before the game gets fun, and that little flashing dot that you can shoot at to get a one-hit KO, well, if you don't shoot it quick enough, it shoots up and chases you down. I don't know what it is, but I like to pretend it's a very fast, very angry probe droid. You can shoot it down for extra points, but if you don't hit it in time, it will kick your ass. And on top of this, unlike in Variation 1, you cannot fly through enemy AT-ATs. If you hit them, you will crash and you will die. This adds a lot more planning to the game because you have to make sure you go around them instead of going through them. And if the enemy is near your shield generator and you still have a few lives left, you could kamikaze into them, taking them out and buying yourself a little bit more time. And that's what takes this game from being a good game to a great game. On Variation 16, I had trouble breaking 2,000. As in, I couldn't break 2,000. My fire button thumb hurts, my wrist is tired from jiggling about my pleasure stick, and I'm sweating like a fat kid in a Pizza Hut. And that's why I love it. Variation 16 is brutally difficult, and it is the absolutely definitive way of playing Empire Strikes Back on the Atari 2600. And every time I go back to this game, and I will go back to this game at least every May the 4th, I will be going straight to Variation 16, and I highly suggest you do as well. So whether you're watching this review on Star Wars Day or any other day of the year, I do highly suggest you go down to your local video store, pick up a copy of the entire Star Wars series, and Empire Strikes Back on the Atari 2600. John Connor is safely in his bunker. Skynet has become self-aware, and the only thing standing between life as norm and Judgment Day is you, the commander of the one and only analog missile command outpost yet to receive Cyberdyne's digital upgrade. This is Missile Command on the Atari 2600. Or at least that's what I tell myself the game is about. Hello, I am Grin Grimsley, and welcome to another video game review by me. If you have a strange and inexplicable hatred towards Terminator or games based off of Terminator, don't worry, because the manual informs us that that's not the storyline at all. And if you love games based on Terminator, then good news for you. Like me, you probably have an imagination and you can pretend what the manual is telling you is crap, because really the manual is crap and this game is about Terminator Judgment Day. I was originally going to read you the actual storyline from the manual, but it begins with the sentence, "Aliens from the planet of Krytal have begun an attack on the planet Zardon," and it's about that far into it that I decided, no, the manual is in fact wrong, and this is about Terminator 3 Judgment Day. But before we do get into the game itself, let's look a bit more at the manual, because there are quite a few funny things in here. The first funny thing I find in this manual is that it's printed with 5 languages in it, which I find quite strange, because surely it would have been cheaper to print 5 different manuals, each with their own language, than it has been to print the one manual with 5 languages and distribute it to all those countries. I mean, that's 5 times the paper and 5 times the ink for every single manual, rather than just splitting them up. The second thing I love about this manual is it comes with a diagram to tell you how to use your pleasure stick in the game. This is funny because it's quite unnecessary, because all you do is point your pleasure stick where you want the cursor to go. It's very straightforward, and it most certainly does not need a complex diagram. The final funny thing with the manual is also reflected in the box, where it advertises that there are 34 video games, and then you go into the manual and it specifies it's actually just the same game with 34 different variations, such as difficulty settings and multiplayer. With this in light, I'm surprised the box didn't also advertise that it has 5 different manuals inside, and then you open the box and it specifies it's just the same manual with 5 different language variations. But that's enough about the manual. Let's get into the actual game. As I stated earlier, you use your pleasure stick to move a cursor around the screen. That cursor functions as an aimer, and when you click the red button, you fire an anti-ballistic missile towards that aimer. You use these anti-ballistic missiles to shoot down interplanetary ballistic missiles and cruise missiles before they hit any of your cities. And oh my golly, when they hit your cities, do they hit them in an amazing fashion. Take a look at this nuclear explosion that occurs. The manual informs us that once all of your cities are destroyed, the game is over. This, however, is not entirely true. Every time you get 10,000 points, you earn an extra city. So if all of your cities are destroyed and the round is not over, you have until the end of the round to get those 10,000 points and get yourself another city once the round is over. Each time you manage to earn yourself another city, you're rewarded with a little ditty that plays. Speaking of which, this game has the most ballsy city planners in the entire universe. Despite the nuclear war still raging, they just build their new cities right on top of the nuclear waste that is the old cities. I'm sure they're aware of what happened to the previous residents, but they just don't seem to care. Some of these landfills even get nuked 4 times in a row, but they just keep building them. I admire that in a city planner. You get points for how many cities survive until the end of the round, you get points for how many missiles you don't use, and you get points for how many missiles of the enemies you shoot down. Clearly, once more, management has spared no expense, with this game costing them a whopping $2 second-hand. The previous owner has written on the back, Game 1, 65,000. So I'm assuming the previous owner's top score was 65,000 on the Game 1 variant. And therefore my score to beat is 65,000 on the Game 1 variant. Not unlike Planet Patrol on the Atari 2600, this game transitions between day and night. Unlike Planet Patrol on the Atari 2600, this game is actually really good fun. It works well, the controllers work well, the graphics look great, there are no game-breaking glitches like are in Planet Patrol on the Atari 2600. The difficulty increases with the game, it's fair, it's fun, and it's fantastic. I am assuming that if you're watching this review, you have not played or do not own Missile Command on the Atari 2600, because if you have played Missile Command, or if you do own Missile Command, then you would not be watching this review right now, you would be playing Missile Command. This game is that good. It is so good that I'm actually encouraging you to stop watching my video and to go and play Missile Command. So if you have got this far into the review, I can only assume that you've not played or do not own Missile Command on the Atari 2600. And to all of you out there who do not own Missile Command or have not played Missile Command, I've got only one thing to say to you. Head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Missile Command on the Atari 2600. Hello, I'm Grin Grimsley, and this is Donkey Kong for the Atari 2600. If you're anything like me, when you hear the word Kong, your first thoughts is this, or possibly even this, or perhaps even this. Kong, King of Atlantis, in which he unfortunately does not team up with this, Aquaman, the true King of Atlantis. But this is not King Kong, it's Donkey Kong, and whether King Kong's actual name is Donkey Kong and this is a prequel preceding his ascension to the throne, or if it's a different Kong altogether. Either way, it's time to slap in the game and have a play. Well, this is the game, and the first thing you notice is that Donkey Kong doesn't look a great deal much like the King Kongs we've seen on the big screen. He looks nothing like this, or this, or even this.
Well, I've been to one World Fair, a picnic, and a rodeo, and that's the stupidest thing I ever heard come over a set of earphones. You sure you got today's code?
In fact, what he looks a lot more like is this.
There it is, Mongo! To the castle! No, you great stupid pastry! Come on!
The graphics are not all bad, however. The little guy you play as looks just like the little guy you play as. And the cookies that Mongo, the giant gingerbread man from Shrek 2, is throwing at you looks just like cookies. Not unlike the title of this game is sort of similar to the title of King Kong, the object of this game seems to be sort of similar to the storyline of King Kong. The giant gingerbread man has stolen what I assume is your girlfriend, and you are climbing up what I'm assuming to be a building, trying to, I assume, rescue her. In the game, there are only 2 levels that loop. The first one where you are dodging cookies, and the second one you're dodging... I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think they might be lamps. Lamps that change direction unfairly and without any indication, and don't seem to have any pattern. I guess you could say...
This is no ordinary lamp!
To beat the first level, you have to just get to the top without dying, and to beat the second level, you have to walk or jump over those little panels that then disappear. Your reward for beating the second level is the first level, and your reward for beating the first level is the second level. At the top of the screen, you have a countdown timer which indicates how much time you have left to finish the level. When you finish the level, the time you have left on that counter is rewarded to your scoreboard. You can also get additions to the timer by jumping over cookies or destroying them with the mushroom you can pick up. However, you can't climb up ladders when you're holding the mushroom, and you can't drop the mushroom, so really, any additional points you get from destroying cookies with the mushroom is just wasted on having to stand around waiting for the mushroom to disappear. The controls in this game are relatively fantastic. You control your little man with your pleasure stick, choosing its direction or whether you want to go up or down ladders, and you use your red button to make him jump. This is helpful if you want to jump things. However, what this game mainly suffers from is it's just not that interesting. With only 2 levels, the diversity is very low, and it seems the only things that get harder are maybe the cookies roll a little faster and the magic lamps change direction a little bit faster, but while this makes it harder, it just doesn't make it any more interesting. You just keep going until eventually you get tripped up by one of these things, and that's the end. And in some ways the dual level system works to a disadvantage, because after you've gone up the first level it builds a precedent, and you expect that the second level will lead to a new level again. However, it takes you back to the first level again, robbing you of your achievement. This is not to say that high scores are not part of the game. There is most certainly a high score system in place. It's just that it builds this sense of progression that then disappears. That doesn't exist in games like Missile Command, where it doesn't build a sense of progression. In Missile Command or even Space Invaders, you're just holding your own. You know, you're not trying to get to another level. But when you're actually climbing up and then getting to the next stage, you're expecting another stage. I think this game would have been far better if you had a few more stages, even if it was only 3 or 4 before it looped. That all said, however, I'm not saying it's a bad game, it's just not a very addictive game. You'll probably play it once or twice and then put it back on the shelf, unlike games like Missile Command that kept me there for the entire night, and then the next night, and then the next night. What I'm saying is, instead of buying this game, perhaps head down to your local video store and rent a copy of Donkey Kong on the Atari 2600. Hello and welcome to another episode of Grin Reviews. I'm Grin Grimsley and I will be your reviewer this evening. Once more, management has sent us a new box game and manual to review, and once more it is of quite questionable quality. Using my vast array of detective skills, I have been able to determine two things by just looking at the box. The first of which being that the game itself is called Surround, and the second of which being that either the previous owner completely despised the box and decided to beat the living crap out of it, or that we have the most careless postman in all of existence. Something that's not quite clear from the footage you're seeing is that the box is also quite sticky, and not in a good way. Apparently the designer of the manual has gone for a rustic look, in that the pages have clearly been exposed to the elements and that the staple has rusted through. Just in case you didn't want your manual in one piece, they've also thoughtfully removed two pages and put them in the box separately. As you can see, the stickiness was not limited to the box alone, and some of the pages are completely stuck together. Let's just say I'm happy that this costume comes with gloves. Miraculously, however, the cartridge itself is in quite good condition and is not sticky. But enough of these shallow observations about what is and is not sticky on the surface. A true reviewer knows that real beauty lies on the stickiness within. So just how sticky is the insides of Surround? Well, very. But in a good way. And I think at this point I'm going to promise to stop talking about stickiness. So let's move on to a cleaner subject matter. To control your character, you grab your pleasure stick firmly and thrust it in the direction you want your character to move. As the colored square that is your character moves, it creates a tail. And as your opponent's colored square character moves, it also creates a tail. Like most tails in real life, it is lethal to touch either of these tails. Therefore, like a noble snowspeeder pilot trying to trip up an enemy AT-AT with your tow cable, and like the name of the game suggests, the objective of this game is to surround your enemy, forcing them to run into your tail. As your increasingly elongating tails continue to fill up the screen, it becomes more difficult to navigate. Eventually, either due to personal mistakes or because you've completely ran out of room, either you or your opponent will run into a tail and die. This death, however, does not end the game, but instead rewards you or your opponent, depending on who's died, a point. 10 points wins the game. Within the game, there are a total of 14 different game variants. Each game variant varies slightly or greatly from the first game variant, which is a variant of all the other variants. From the get-go, you can tell that this game is supposed to be a multiplayer game, because the first game variant is a multiplayer game variant. Both multiplayer and single player have a varying array of various variants. Enough of this, however, let's get down and actually talk about them. The first game variant is the simple one-on-one version of Surround, and the second game variant is simply the single-player version of the Game 1 variant, where an artificial intelligence will replace Controller 1. Both of these game types are a bit slow-moving, and it's a bit more of a strategy game than anything else, especially against the AI, where if you figure out a pattern you can really trick them the same way each time. With a real person, however, it becomes a bit more difficult, and it sort of becomes a complex version of noughts and crosses. Variant 3 and Variant 4 are also the AI and non-AI reflections of each other, where the main difference between Variant 1 and 2 is that the game speeds up as you go. While the AI in game Variant 4 can still be tricked pretty easily, the speed up of the game makes it much more interesting, as it's no longer just a strategy game but also a reflex game. If you're wondering why it doesn't look like either player is doing very well in my multiplayer demonstrations, it's because Grim was out of the office, so I was playing this by myself. If you're playing it against a real other person, it's great fun, but I don't suggest you try to control both the pleasure sticks yourself. Game Variant 5 and 6 introduces diagonal movements, which adds a huge dimension to the game when you're playing multiplayer. However, I stress multiplayer as there is no artificial intelligence options for Game 5 and 6. Once again, Game 5 has only one speed, while Game 6 will speed up as you go. Game variants 8 through 11 make it so you can move through the sides or the top of the screen and come out the other side. And aside from that, they just cycle through the other things we've talked about before with diagonal movements, speed changes and whatnot. There's not much change there, but the looping is pretty cool, and unfortunately once again we're without AIs. Game 13, however, is completely different, and instead of it being a combat game, it's an art game. You throw aside your swords and pick up paintbrushes. It's no longer a versus game, and instead you're just making pretty pictures. Variant 14 also allows you to do art, however it provides you with a different color spectrum and the ability to move your brush diagonally. Once a tool for destruction, now a tool of beauty. While it's not exactly thrilling, I do find it quite cool, and it's just good fun being able to make pictures on the Atari 2600. It's not something I expected to be able to do, and it's a cool addition to the game. The manual refers to this as video game graffiti. So do I suggest this game? Yes, I do. Surround is a fantastically good fun game, and easily the best multiplayer game I've played on the Atari 2600 so far. And if you're like me and no one's there to play the game with you, these single-player AI games do hold up. But I suggest you hunt someone down and force them to play, because the extra game types like diagonal or being able to move through the top and bottom of the screen is also great fun. So I guess what I'm saying is head down to the local pub and pick up some friends, and then head down to the local video store and pick up a copy of Surround on the Atari 2600.
What does everyone say to some miniature golf followed by a round of frosty chocolate milkshakes?
That's right, today we will be reviewing miniature golf on the Atari 2600. Hello, I'm Grin Grimsley, and as you probably don't know, as I've never said it on this channel before, I'm a big fan of miniature golf, the regular kind. And therefore I suppose I'm probably going to be a big fan of miniature golf, the digital kind, the Atari 2600 kind. The fact that there is a real kind of miniature golf adds an interesting dimension to the review, because unlike every other game I've reviewed before, this is not so much fantasy as it is a simulator, I suppose. I've not really fought aliens in space, or at least I'm contractually obligated to not admit that I've fought aliens in space, but I can say that I have played miniature golf, and therefore I can compare this game to real-life miniature golf. On the front cover of the cartridge for miniature golf, you can see 3 people enjoying a game of miniature golf. Interesting, the 2 people behind and the 1 person in front all seem to be cheering on the shot quite happily, which I just find bizarre, as none of them seem to be secretly hoping their opponent fails to give them an upper hand. You can also see that the miniature golf course on the cartridge goes up to 18 holes, which is a blatant lie, as in the game itself it only goes up to 9 holes. This can be forgiven, however, because it is a very pretty picture. So let's put in the game itself and see how it holds up to the picture. As I mentioned earlier, there are 9, not 18 holes, each of them with their own individual layouts. The graphics, while simplistic, are instantly recognizable. If you know the game is miniature golf, and you look at the screen, you can instantly see where the putting area is, you can instantly see where the hole is, you can instantly see where the ball is, and you can even tell which one the bumpers are. It might be simplistic, but it gets the job done. When you start each hole, in the top left of the screen it tells you which hole you're on, and in the top right of the screen it tells you what the par is. For those of you who are not miniature golf enthusiasts, par is the maximum amount of time you can hit the ball before it goes in the hole without your friends making fun of you for being bad at miniature golf. Unlike pretty much every other game I've ever seen on the Atari 2600, the aim is not to get a high score but a low score. But also, unlike pretty much every game I've seen on the Atari 2600, there is no punishment for doing bad. The game just goes on for as long as it goes. So I guess the only real punishment is self-loathing or your friends ridiculing you. Just like real miniature golf, come to think of it. And now that I've mentioned friends, I should point out that this game, not unlike real miniature golf, is also multiplayer. You and your friend can take turns hitting the ball, and the person with the lowest score at the end wins. The first time I played through the game, I did not get under par at all, and instead discovered that if you get over 99 points, your score ticks back down to 0. Therefore, getting 1 for the entire game, I suppose I did get under par, although it did feel a little bit dirty. If I want to get a better score than that, I'm going to have to shut off the logical part of my mind, embrace nothingness, and become like an uncarved stone. And while I'm working on all that hippie crap, allow me to tell you how you actually play the game. Not unlike Missile Command, you use your pleasure stick to move a cursor around the screen. The position of your cursor in relation to the bowl allows you to determine how much power and angle you put into your shots. And of course, like real miniature golf, your aim is to get your bowl into the hole. Just like real miniature golf, a perfectly lined up shot can get you a hole in one, and just like real miniature golf, missing a perfect shot can really screw over your game. When you're doing well in the game is fantastic, and when you're doing bad in the game is completely frustrating and you hate it. So in that sense, it's also just like miniature golf. Once again, not unlike miniature golf, the best way to play this game is multiplayer. However, the single player aspect is also great fun. It would have been cool, however, if you could just select which hole you wanted to play so you could practice a bit by yourself. So let's talk about negatives. As I said, it would have been cool to have a practice option, but the second negative in the game is that there's only 9 holes. It would have been cool if there were 18 holes, but I suppose this is actually a positive dressed up as a negative, because if the game wasn't great fun, I wouldn't be wishing for more holes, would I? And the third negative in the game is glitches. If you hit the bowl as hard as you can, it sometimes does some weird stuff. For instance, there was this time where it phased through a wall, and it also in this time it seems to have gotten stuck in purgatory. And at one point, which I was not able to catch on camera, my ball was hit by the bouncer out through the arena and just, well, it was gone, so that was really game over. This is obviously not a good thing, but on the other hand, it's also a bit reflective of real miniature golf, because if you slug your ball as hard as you can, there is a chance it will disappear. And also, if the miniature golf course manager sees you doing it, there's a chance your game would be over as well. So I guess that's kind of just the bowl going into the car park and you being sent home with your head hanging low. Negatives aside, as you can see, if you practice at the game, you can get a much better score and you can really figure out the best way to play each hole. So as always, when we come to the end of these reviews, I'm forced to answer the question I always answer. Do I recommend this game? Well, if you are a fan of real miniature golf, this game gives you a surprisingly accurate miniature golf simulator. It gives you the same rewarding feeling when you succeed and gives you the same angry frustration when you fail. So if you are a fan of real miniature golf, I highly recommend you grab your friend and head out for a round of miniature golf on the Atari 2600.
Hello, I'm the recently disembodied head of Grin Grimsley, and welcome to the very scary, very spooky Halloween special of Grin Reviews. When management told me that I was going to do a Halloween special, I asked for their scariest game they had, and they did not disappoint. In this game, you play as a disembodied head, which I find I'm recently quite capable of relating to. Your head is chased by 4 specters through an endless, inescapable labyrinth. This game is so frightening, so fearful, and so horrifying that I can barely utter its name. Ladies and gentlemen, for your morbid curiosity, I present to you Pac-Man on the Atari 2600.
This is Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. And this is Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 if you turn the color switch on. It is far less macabre when the color is turned on, but it does make it a lot easier to play. So let's go with the color on for this review. As I mentioned in the introduction to this video, you play as a disembodied head who seems to be called Pac-Man. However, if you look at the front cover of the cartridge, it seems that he does have hands and legs. So he's not so much a disembodied head as he is a head, and that is his body. So perhaps I was jumping to a premature conclusion when I stated that Pac-Man was a disembodied head. If anything, he is a bodied head. As you can see, when you boot up the game, you find yourself, Pac-Man, in a labyrinth filled with small rectangles. The object of the game is to run around the maze or labyrinth and collect as many of those little rectangles as you can. Those rectangles give you points, and when you've collected all those rectangles, you finish the level and progress to the next one. However, as Harry Potter or Theseus would be quick to tell you, this labyrinth is not without its danger. The challenges Pac-Man faces in this maze is not a Minotaur, but instead 4 ghosts. The ghosts in the game are not really the creepy kind of ghost, but instead make me think of It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. But this is in no way a negative, and me comparing the graphics to Charlie Brown should not be taken in any sense as a negative thing. Charlie Brown has absolutely beautiful visuals, and the visuals in this game are pretty good themselves. You can tell exactly where the maze is, you can tell that the ghosts are ghosts, or maybe jellyfish, and even though Pac-Man is a strange looking creature, it does look sort of like the cartoon version of him you find on the cartridge. So I think as far as representations hold up, the graphics are actually quite good in this game. The only real downside I could find in the graphics is that the ghosts flicker quite a lot. It's not really too bad because most of the time you're looking at Pac-Man and the ghosts are in your peripheral vision, so you don't notice it too much. But when you start noticing it, it is a bit distracting. However, if early Supernatural has taught me anything, it's that ghosts do in fact flicker, so I think I can excuse even that. If a ghost touches you, you lose a life, and if you finish a level, you gain a life. And just like most games on the Atari 2600, when you run out of lives, your game is over. However, against these ghost defenses, you are not. In the 4 corners of the screen, there are large squares, and if you eat these squares, you become able to eat ghosts. So in a way, I suppose they're proton packs, and I can confirm that busting makes me feel good. It definitely makes your score feel good, because the way you can rack up the high score is eating as many ghosts as you can. Another way to rack up the high score is to eat the large square that sometimes appear underneath the ghost's chamber. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be, but I like to imagine it's a golden block, mainly because ever since I was a kid I've always wanted to try to eat golden blocks, and this game finally fulfills that fantasy. Every time you complete a level, the following level is slightly faster, and by that I mean the ghost is slightly faster. It becomes increasingly difficult to outrun and outmaneuver them. The controls in the game are quite simple, or at least they would be if I still had a body. All you have to do to move around your Pac-Man is to jiggle around your pleasure stick. The red button serves no purpose except for resetting the game, which I found to be a pretty cool use for the red button. Instead of making it completely useless, they made you not have to bother to lean over and reset the game on the console. The game also has 2 different difficulty settings and a multiplayer option, which I just found to be fantastic. But now let's talk about negatives in the game. I've already mentioned that the ghosts flicker a fair bit, but this isn't the real problem in the game. The main problem is the collision detection, or more of the lack thereof. The collision detection often fails in strange ways. For instance, it seems that your mouth doesn't count as part of your character, so if the mouth is open when you're heading towards a rectangle, you don't collect it. This is a minor problem that you can get used to, but if you're in a later level and having to move really fast, it can be quite annoying to basically be completely over top of a rectangle and then turn around to dodge a ghost and find that you didn't in fact collect it. A further problem with the hit detection is sometimes the ghosts manage to get you when it doesn't feel like they've actually touched you at all. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes the ghosts just pass straight through you. When this first happened, I was quite surprised, but now that I think about it, in movies ghosts can often pass through people, so maybe that was just what they were going for. These collision detection issues are annoying when they happen, but they're not game destroying like they are in Planet Patrol. So even when they happen, you can usually keep playing the game fine. Overall though, these are minor negatives on a very fun game. It gets fast-paced quick, and it's very fun to try to beat your high score. So if you're looking for a good game to play this Halloween, I do certainly recommend Pac-Man.
So there you have it. If you're looking for a super spooky game to play this Halloween, I highly suggest you head, see what I did there? Down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Pac-Man on the Atari 2600.